I'm Catherine Martin, as Brian said, so I don't need to introduce myself, but I'm going to start by introducing Margo on my left, who is the artist, and some of you already know her very well, some of you may not. I hope that you will, if you haven't already seen it, get to see the exhibition, because the best way to know an artist is through the name, and the second best is through the conversation we're about to have. And then on my right here is Luke Gibbons, who is well known to a lot of people as maybe the most interesting cultural commentator that we have in the country at the moment, and is able to look back at history, look at what's happening in the contemporary. Not many people do that, so it's very important to do it, and then look beyond that and see where that fits in to bigger and wider trends. I met Luke first in 1985 or thereabouts, when I was kind of fidgeting around doing a thesis on the representation of the famine in Ireland, and Luke's questions then in a queue for coffee in Trinity downstairs in that awful place, the coffee dock in Trinity, put me on a path that I never really went back on. So I should say all kinds of things about your publications, Luke, but maybe that's enough to start.
Enough.
And then on Luke's right is Brian, who has already spoken to you, who is the director of Kilmainham Jail, and also is responsible for the Pearse Museum on behalf of the OPW. And actually, I'm bringing all this back to myself. I realise that's very selfish, but I'll get off it. Brian is the chairman of Common Ground, which is a really, really fantastically, I think, caring and innovative arts organisation that also is about arts and community development in this area. And Brian is the chairman of the board of Common Ground, and I happen to be on it as well, so I get a chance to see another side of him, which is really good, because managing a jail carries negative connotations, even if it's a museum. Okay, so that's the start. I'm going to start with asking Margo very direct questions, Margo. So Margo, this is an exhibition called Voices. It's in Kilmainham Jail. Maybe you'd start by telling us how you came to be here and what the connections between the exhibition and the jail are.
Well, I've come to the making of the exhibition, the Voices. I did a project on Kathleen Lynn in 2016. She was an activist and nationalist, and I showed that work in Castlebar, the Lynn and All Arts Centre, and then I went on to do the Jackie Clark Collection residency, and I did a series of work on it was called Keepsakes, and it was to do with, again, keepsakes that people kept from 1916 to 1923, but I became aware that women weren't really represented that much, and I found out that Kilmainham Jail, they have a huge collection of the objects that women had in the Civil War. So I applied for the Markovich Award, and I got it, and it was through, I approached Brian and yourself actually, who agreed to support me, and Brian, which was really good. He supported me in the application that I would have an exhibition here, and he gave me great access to all of the collections, artifacts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's how I came to have Voices here, which is brilliant.
Yes, so that's about the voices of women. We talk about the title in a minute, but there is another exhibition that you did that I thought was really important in your career, certainly one that I found enormously important, and that was work to do with a family member and the current military prison in the current camp.
Yeah. I suppose I originally came to do the type of work I do at the moment. It was through a great uncle of mine who was interned in the 1940s in the Curragh camp. And he was treated very badly. He was interned for 2 years, and he died within the year of coming out because he got TB there. I suppose I got into him because his history was very hidden in the family. We didn't really know much about it. And because my grandfather was a guard I would imagine there was a split in the family, you know. So I did a whole exhibition where I researched about him, and I went to the military archives and found all the letters that related to him, including letters from his mother and things like that. So that really moved me. So from that I moved on to...
Sure. So we're moving from secrets to voices.
Yes.
Talk to us a bit about the title of this show.
The title, I suppose, I kind of wanted to give the women a voice because they don't seem to have a voice, just generally anyway, in life, but also within the whole context of the Civil War and the Rising. They seem to have a powerful position, but then they disappeared as well. The title I just thought would give them the space for people to see the objects and relate back to their family histories as well. You know, it is also the voices too relates to me having a voice about my work as well. You know, so that's part of it as well. You know,
I think that's very important. We might come back to that.
Yeah.
But the idea of not just making the work, but also sometimes speaking for it, and a lot of artists find that excruciatingly difficult.
Yeah.
So we've had this conversation.
it's not my kind, you know.
Well, I'm very glad that you're doing it now. Okay, let's stay with the exhibition then and think about the content of it. How did you pick the pieces? Because the exhibition, the works that you see in the show are only a fraction of the work that Margo actually made. But of course, there wasn't space for all of the work, and sometimes anyway less is more. But talk about that.
In making the work, like Brian was really fantastic and let me have a look at the storeroom and the archives and would bring out objects. So a lot of my research was taking photographs, millions of photographs, which Brian would say yes I did. And I also I took a lot of photographs of the space as well, of the cells and the prison. I just think the building itself is a fantastic building, you know. And the objects I chose were objects that moved me, you know. And a lot of the thing about the objects is sometimes they're quite ordinary too, you know. But by choosing them, it kind of elevates them, and you know, things like the Red Cross armbands and things like that, they were just so moving. I think that there's remnants of what's left, you know.
Because you mentioned the Red Cross armbands in particular, you could see them on the loop PowerPoint behind us, but it's the only print in the show that has colour in it. Tell us about your use of colour. Why do you go for so much that is just black and white?
I just think black and white is, it's what I've worked in, but it's not just an ordinary black. There's colour within it as well. And I suppose that the red armbands, I made them red because I just thought as a symbol they were a really strong image, you know. I just, as a technique, it kind of isolates the image so you see the image alone.
Yeah, and in the context of this exhibition, because we hung it together, the red made all the nuances of colour in the black and white work emerge more fully, I think, and it made the red armbands, or that redness, twice as strong and vivid than it might be in another context, isn't it?
Yeah, because I suppose if all the prints were coloured, you wouldn't have actually noticed them. But generally I don't use colour with those activities, you know. I think they're coming up now.
You chose a variety of things, like a shopping list and different objects.
There's the Red Cross.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that like the shopping list and things like that, they're just, I suppose, they're just ordinary things, you know.
Why did you want to show ordinary things? Because you expect these women to be extraordinary.
Yeah, we see often that, I think often that it's the ordinary things that are special, you know. And I suppose it's what we have in our own lives, it's often ordinary, you know.
And you're giving voice to that
yes,
ordinariness.
Yeah.
Then I'm very used to seeing exhibitions of prints by Margo, but for me a big discovery in this show were the paintings. So let's have a few minutes talking about the paintings.
The paintings are very different. A painting itself is such a different process to the printmaking. Printmaking is all about taking the photographs, developing the photographs, dates, and then printing. And so it's quite a long process, whereas the paintings are quite immediate, you know. For me, the paintings are much more emotional, but the brushstrokes are there. I wanted to get the expression of feeling within the paintings, which I captured, especially of the space as well, you know.
And of the jail, I mean, one of them, that beautiful big diptych, it's called Lissadell.
Yes, I visited Lissadell House, which is a fantastic space, but I was taken with the garden, you know. So the paintings in the Markovich lived there, so I thought it was really important to do that research. But I painted the plant in the garden, which is quite an exotic plant, but it's that kind of, I think it was a non-native plant, which I kind of liked as well, you know.
Yeah. And some of the other objects belonged to women who were not imprisoned in the jail as well, is that right?
Yeah, I did a lot of research with other people as well, outside of, well, some of the people outside of the museum here. I would have contacts. There's a jacket that belonged to a woman, his grandmother from Strokestown actually. And it's actually not in the slides. And there's a melodeon as well, which belonged to a woman who emigrated, you know. And it's brought back again. Yeah, I think it's important to get. I wanted to get stuff from outside the museum as well and include it as well. You know.
What I was very taken with as we talked about selecting and curating for the exhibition was how much respect Margo felt was due to all of the families who owned objects that were lent to her or shown to her in the making of the work. I'm going to move over to Luke for a few minutes, Margo. I might come back to you again.
Okay.
Don't relax too much. Luke, in a previous piece of writing that you did for one of these other lovely books of Margo's, you said something that I thought was really interesting. You said, and I'm quoting, rather than being aesthetically pleasing, the images evoke reproach and guilt. Now, you don't normally think of people going to an exhibition to have reproach and guilt evoked in them, but bear with me. He says, it is the Irish viewer that is put on the spot. The suffering that took place there was done in the name of the nation. I think that's really powerful, Luke, and it's widening it out from immediately where Margo herself is coming from and putting the rest of us on the spot, as you say. Would you say a bit more about that?
That was in relation to Tin Town in the Curragh, where amazingly the relative of Margo's was called Aeneas McNulty, and the same individual with the same name figures as the character in Sebastian Barry's novels, in 3 or 4 novels, and the name Aeneas wouldn't exactly be a common Irish name. And it's an uncanny coincidence that Aeneas McNulty was interned in the Curragh, almost in keeping with Sebastian Barry's tracking of this individual. But one of the most plaintive things, if I talk about guilt, in the exhibition about Tin Town, was the letter his mother wrote to the most flint-hearted Minister for Justice, Jerry Boland. She couldn't have written to a more impassive individual. And the letter was saying, do you not realise we've no one to save the hay? Will you let out Aeneas to save the hay? Because we've no one to save the hay. And I could just imagine Boland reading this. For Boland, the incongruity of it, such a trivial thing. compared to the nation, in a way. But I think, in a way, the exhibition and your work picks up on the sensibility that thinks of saving
the ordinariness.
when the big picture kind of blocks out things. And in Tin Town, in that exhibition, what's remarkable about it is the struggle. And I nearly say this is part of this exhibition too, the struggle for visibility. That things are not obvious, things are not clear, things are not self-evident. So, particularly for those who are not listened to, those who are screened off or who blocked out from public view. I mean, internment took place in the Curragh with over 2,000 individuals, and it wasn't reported in the papers. It couldn't be reported. And the whole thing was screened off and blocked out. So the struggle for visibility becomes almost the artist's obligation to put people back into visibility. And in the Curator, there isn't a trace left. I was thinking of that song, the last thing on my mind, Leave Not a Trace Behind. There isn't a trace left of the galvanised huts and camps. They've been completely blotted, obliterated. And Margo's images show tire tracks of tractors and showed endless horizons, vanishing horizons, as if hope itself was vanishing on the horizon, these kind of indefinite horizons. Whereas in this, and it reminded me, it was an exhibition in Emma some years ago by Chloe Matthews called Shot at Dawn, a very disturbing exhibition of the poor unfortunates, so-called deserters, up to 1,000 who were shot at dawn by the Allies for cowardice, for shirking. And we would now say they were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But they were shot at dawn and not a single memorial anywhere for them. So she went around the farmyards in France and Flanders looking for these poor individuals. And now and again she'd get a bullet in a wall where the firing squad went over the shoulder of the individual. But not a single sign where these poor individuals were wiped out. So she was filming, she was photographing nothing, in fact. She was photographing absence rather than presence. And that's what you were doing in Tin Town. You were actually visualizing absence rather than presence. And in this case, it's the struggle for visibility is nearly the opposite, because there are walls and corridors trying to block people's views. And there's you have it, Brian, in the exhibition, a large version of Jack B. Yeats's Communicating with Prisoners painting. And what's poignant about it is that the window becomes the sole way of communicating with the outside world, but also of letting light in. So the window lets light in, but it also is the way of communicating with the outside world. So it's almost as if Margo's images are those windows, restored, if you like, in different ways, both letting light in. So, I mean, the paintings are very evocative. You get these sources of light. Actually, Beckett has a great phrase. I think it's a Jack B. Yeats, another Jack B. Yeats painting. People may know of it, called Going to Wolfe Tone's Grave. And it's of Kingsbridge, as it was called, Houston Station, just down below. And it's the gloomiest painting. It looks like a Mark Rothko. In fact, it doesn't even look figurative. It's just, it looks a gloom, black, brown, blue paint. And then you can barely make out Maud Gonne and Charlotte Despard. But up in the corner in the gloom, there's a window. And it was Beckett who said, in the gloom, there might mathematically be a door. Mathematically, there might be a door in the corner. And like an exit sign. And that notion, so the paintings are very evocative because it's this atmospheric light and looking for light, actually, and you can just about make a door is open. There's another effect where if you like, there's staircases. And I was saying this to Margo, and actually it's hard to know whether the stairs are leading up or down. And it does make a difference whether your fortunes are up or whether your fortunes are down. But the staircases are enigmatically ambiguous, not meant to be, but just the way they're painted. And I think that's very evocative too of the dilemma of the prisoners. They're not sure whether the fortunes are going up or down. And I'd say the key thing is an effect, which was in your previous work too. And it's uncanny, and it is part of the struggle for visibility, the lack of clarity.
Yeah.
And it is, in that case, shadows become echoes. So the shadow is actually the visual equivalent of an echo, of a voice. It's almost as if shadows are echoes thrown by light. So the voices are captured in light, and the shadows become. So there's these effects. There's doors that are dark, but actually a dark door might be an open door. Actually, the way the doors are painted, it's dark, but it may not be the end of the road, because for all, I mean, it's painted in a certain way that the door might be open, admittedly dark. And the word dark comes up a lot in the exhibition. Jenny comment has something about
the darker side of things in prison.
The darker side of things in prison. She's a big thing, the darker side of things in prison. And in that sense, what you're doing, it really is the struggle against the darkness. And one thing I will read out, because I just have to have it. This book is on display in one of the cases. The story is written by Dorothy McCarthy in this very jail. And again, she was struggling with the light, even to write, she had to struggle. But one of the prisoners, I mean, the whole thing is about darkness and light, and it's just worth reading. It's only short, but she says, it's a story called The Prisoner, and it's her, obviously, in the jail. She says, I was striving to keep my mind clear till my heart would stop, and the darkness was against me, the darkness, thick and powerful and black. I said to myself that if I could pierce that, if I could make myself see anything, I'd not go mad. I put out all my strength, striving to see the window, or the peephole that I knew was there, or the crucifix on the wall, and I failed. I knew there was a little iron seat clamped on the wall opposite me, in the corner. I willed with a desperate intensity to see even that, and I did see at last. And actually in the story, when she sees the little seat, there's a boy sitting on it. And the boy is a survivor of the 1798 rebellion. And he has been accused of betraying Lord Edward Fitzgerald. He says, I didn't do it. And I know it's 150 years later, but you have to tell him I didn't do it. So the thing about ghosts, so this kind of atmospheric image is kind of a haunting. And the echoes are in fact hauntings. Hauntings by voices, hauntings by shadows. In Joyce's story, the dead, the ghosts are called shades. As if shadows themselves are kind of ghosts in a way. So I think in that sense, the paintings put this kind of frame around the objects. And the several objects, part of the material artifacts of the museum are on display. But it's almost as if the objects have to be reproduced to give them this kind of halo or this kind of atmospheric response. And in that sense, you're almost seeing the objects the way the prisoners saw them, through a glass darkly, through a cloud of view. They're struggling with visibility. And that's why I think it's so touching 100 years later. It's hard to believe if those women knew that 100 years later we'd be here, when they were utterly in the pits of despair, if they knew, they wouldn't have dreamt of it. And yet here we are 100 years later, and the objects that Brian has in the storerooms and on display So I think in that sense, the artifacts are given voices. And that's what the artist is, and that's what Margo you've done so well in the exhibition. You've given voices back to these inanimate objects, these throwaway cutlery, embroidery, futile objects in some ways. But they've got a voice back, even if it has taken 100 years to do it. And that's why McArdle's stories, McArdle comes up again and again in your exhibition. There's even a performance by the female prisoners. And McArdle is one of the prisoners, but her poetry is part of the performance. And then there's a typescript document, which is, you might talk about that, this damning indictment sheet of the brutality, the brutalisation of the female prisoners when they're removed from here to the North Dublin Union. And unlucky for the authorities, Dorothy McArdle was a good writer, and she observed everything. And she issued this absolutely damning indictment. And that was one of the first times the Free State was put on the spot, to use the phrase about guilt. The Free State was put on the spot because McArdle's eye was just unerring. And so that caused a controversy. So you might say something about that.
Absolutely, Brian. I think what would be nice is if you talk about the two exhibitions together. So there is your exhibition with the artifacts
In dialogue with you.
and Margo's art exhibition.
Yeah, so this is, I suppose it's the first time that we've done this. So we've done lots and lots of art exhibitions and obviously historical exhibitions over the years. And I was just thinking the first proper museum job I got was back in 1999. Sally Smith, whose mother, Baby and me, had been a prisoner in the Civil War and had fought in the Rising, and had actually been the fiancée of Dick McKee. She was artist in residence and produced this body of work, and I had just finished my master's, and Pat gave me a job for 2 months to curate this exhibition in the East Wing. So we've kind of done that before, but we've never done the two in parallel. And in some ways it kind of came about, as a lot of things have come about in terms of just the pressure of the decade of centenaries, because I'd been working with Margo and I'd also kind of simultaneously been trying to work on our historical exhibition about the women in the Civil War. And even though we've done stuff about the women, we've never done something exclusively about this period in the Civil War. We probably have the best collection of material that exists in relation to this story, so there's a great kind of responsibility on us. I felt to do something for the centenary. So when I was talking to Margo initially, and I said, now the only thing is, it would be 2023, we're already booked up for that, we're doing this historical exhibition. And then as it went on, I kept thinking more and more, but Margo's work also has to be on display in 2023, and I said, well, could we hive off a room or whatever? But it kind of evolved, this idea of them kind of running in parallel and kind of speaking to one another. And I think both exhibitions are kind of hugely enriched by that idea of having the objects and actually having Margo's interpretation of them. And it's funny when you were talking, Luke, about I suppose the kind of elevation of the objects in Margo's work, almost like they become almost kind of iconic. And I was thinking of actually something that the women here do in April of 1924, when they have this ceremony, a day of ceremonies actually, of commemoration for the 7th anniversary of the 1916 Rising. And they're very canny. There's a huge propaganda victory for them because Grace Plunkett, who had married here and it's kind of a celebrity at the time, has been placed back in Kilmainham jail by the Free State government. It's a terrible own goal. Nora Connolly O'Brien as well, the daughter of James Connolly, is back in Kilmainham jail on the anniversary of the Rising. But in terms of the jail itself, this is the first time that the Rising was ever commemorated here. And they have mass in the morning, and then at 3 o'clock they go to the Stonebreakers Yard where the executions took place, which is now, like in 66 and again in 2016, that's where the most solemn and serious ceremonies of the commemoration of the Rising take place. And for me, that's the moment where there's the kind of an apotheosis of Kilmainham Jail, where it goes from being a historic building to being this kind of sacred space within the nation. And I think there's this kind of sanctification that they do. And I was saying, they're almost like the Vestal Virgins in ancient Rome, in this kind of enclosed Holy of Holies. And I think to a certain extent what Margo's doing is, again, is like taking these objects and, you know, through her art is kind of elevating them and saying that these are more than ordinary objects, these are kind of icons, these are kind of, you know, and these women would have kind of related to these items being relics. So I suppose that's, in some ways, I think how those two exhibitions have worked so well together. But I said, like, it was really, like, you know, professionally, it's a really interesting process. It's very, it was a very different experience because I was like, oh, I'm used to working with artists, and it's very clear in normally your role, you know, your role is to facilitate the artist to get an exhibition over the line for your institution. But it was very interesting to be in a situation where you're wanting to look after the artist, but you're also saying, but I also need to do this other exhibition in parallel as well. You know, and I was saying to someone as well, and you know, in the back of my mind I said, this is kind of interesting. Male curator does an exhibition about female history, and then is kind of talking about making space for a woman artist who's interpreting the same thing. That could go horribly wrong. But luckily, but yeah. So, but I think it's really interesting.
There's really tension there, though, isn't there?
Yeah. And in all exhibition space is always a thing, and it's a long time since I've worked on an exhibition where you like, you know, I know from colleagues where there's kind of where they're doing kind of spans of history where the 18th century curators will be at daggers drawn with the 19th century curator over a bit of space. But what I thought was interesting was as it progressed as well, it became so clear that both exhibitions were being so enhanced by being beside one another, to the extent to which I would find it hard now to imagine how you would do that exhibition without having the objects beside it.
We're almost saying that Margo's exhibition should be in perpetuity because, as you were saying, we're almost in dialogue with the artifacts so much that the space would suddenly appear void. Not necessarily, but
yeah.
But there is a bigger tension there, and that is, you know, if you put these works, as we know from looking at them on the slide, if you put them into a white cube gallery space, they will look entirely different. They'll be separated from history and all that massive amount of research that you put into finding out about all of the people whose objects are shown and all of the objects themselves and how they fit into the history. Or, to go back to the Tin Town exhibition, the negative spaces where only the barest traces remain. And so what the prints are about the imprint of history, really, aren't they? So what was really good here was to add the paintings to it, and maybe we will say more about that, because there was even a dialogue between us all when the exhibition was coming together about whether there was enough space for the paintings and whether, because you need the right kind of space for paintings. They need to be seen where the building doesn't overwhelm them or where the light is right for them and so on. And the deal wasn't made to do that job, but it did it. It did it very well, actually, in the end. But I think, to go back to the white cube space, there is that problem that maybe the work in some ways could look, you know, infinitely, it would take on another life again in the white cube space, but it would lose all that body of research and history that goes behind.
Ironically, the paintings, if they were against a white cube space, would look dark, whereas in fact, because the walls are so dark here, they look like illumination. They look as if they're struggling themselves for illumination in a way.
So I think it'd be good now, Margo, if you said a little bit about why you made those paintings, because the others carried the print of history, literally, by being prints, but why the paintings?
Again, it's to do with the context of the prison itself, and I do feel that spaces are very atmospheric, and I do feel they're kind of haunted. And I just felt that the paintings themselves would express that more than the prints. The prints express the objects because they're very precise and they are as they are, but the paintings kind of, for me, express the emotion of the space and the feeling about it. because I think it's a fantastic space, you know, all the cells and all of that, and you know, it's just, I wanted to evoke that feeling.
It sounds to me, but contradict me if I'm wrong then in this interpretation of this, as if you almost felt a moral duty to expose the history in the form of the prints. So that belongs to other people as well as yourself, whereas the paintings are about you and it's very personal.
The paintings are more about me and my feelings. The prints are about the objects themselves, you know. So they're kind of out there, other than the personal objects, my own ones. But the paintings are more about me, and I suppose it's about me finding my voice as well, and through painting, because I did give it up for years, and I've only taken it up again in the past 10 years.
Well, it's great that you did.
You have them called interiors, and we were saying it's almost as if the paintings are interior space,
Yeah, I kind of wanted that.
whereas the objects are in external space, but the paintings are interior. The interiors of rooms, fair enough, but you're almost suggesting that they're interiors of the psyche, that they're interiors of the heart in a way. And in that sense, it's a good question if they were in another space, what to come across is, because one difference between, I mean, the phrase comes up in art lingo, site-specific work, where the work is actually specific to the building or site that is commemorating or that is on. And a site-specific work is so different from a representation, because in a site-specific work, as here, it's more a reenactment. It's not just a reproduction. It's not just at one remove from the reality. It's a bit like the tactile touch of paint. You're touching it. It's actually being touched by what it represents. So it becomes a reenactment, and that becomes very close to what Brian was saying, to it becoming a kind of sacred space, because reenactment is getting very close to ritual, and to commemoration becoming ritual, actually becoming almost part of the thing itself. So in that sense, it's a good question whether they would have the same evocative power. They're still the same images.
I do remember Brian talking a lot about sacred space. So in a way, I think that really influenced the paintings as well. That space to record the space.
It's reenacted.
Reenacted.
Which is theatre in a way. It's closer to that sense of action and theatre and movement.
Yeah, and they do a lot of theatre here, in the women themselves in terms of
dramatist.
And the commemoration on the 24th of April, they perform Pierce's The Singer, which in itself is kind of his dress rehearsal, I think, for the 1960 Rising, or his idealised form, and then they do more than in August. But also was thinking as well in terms of the artists who were here, so there's a number of these women are very creative in art and craft, like Grace Plunkett is probably the most famous and probably the most accomplished. But the thing she does with her cell is she turns it almost into a chapel with the famous Kilmainham Madonna, and that kind of stuff as well is really subversive. So she does that in a very kind of religious way, but then some of the other women, they do this kind of domestication of the space. So they make curtains out of prison blankets. You can see now some of the graffiti that survives as photo frames or picture frames painted on with like a string drawn onto the wall, where they would have stuck pictures from magazines. And what I think is really interesting about that is, in some ways, it's very stereotypically feminine to domesticate your space, but within the context of that building, which is designed for a very specific purpose, any domestication or actually individualization of the space is deeply subversive.
Humanizing.
And that has an attack on the intention of the building. And again, the more they create, the more they are creative and colourful and even playful. In some ways it's more, certainly it's as subversive in some ways as going on hunger strike or what they do when they refuse to leave them at the end of it.
I'm glad you mentioned all of those things, Brian, because I think actually to bring it back to feminist, we set ourselves up with 2 women on this side, 2 men on that side. I don't know if you noticed, guys. But actually, what the women did was humanise the building, because they started to do. When I go into a hotel, I always turn the pictures backwards on the wall because they're always horrible, and they annoy me. They upset me in the room. But the men in my life would never dream of doing that kind of thing. I think it is what women do, and Margo was giving voices to women. I'm very conscious that it would be lovely to hear from all of you. So before I move away from us and invite you to talk, I want to just mention the book. Margo has had 4 exhibitions now. In each one of them, she's done a collaboration with a little printing press on the island called Red Fox Press. And they are really exceptional because they're not like catalogues of an exhibition that other people do. Catalogues that other people do are made to sell in their hundreds and try and make a bit of money for the institution and at the same time promote the work. These are very specifically beautifully made books in limited editions, and what I like about it is it's a real sign of the integrity of this artist that she is also helping and promoting and cooperating with other artists who do something very special. So I just call everyone's attention to that, because I don't know if there are copies of the book available, but look out for it, or look out for other catalogues of Margo's that are Red Fox Press books. Do you want to talk a little bit about them for a minute?
Yeah, I've had 4 sold shows in the past, 5 years. And I do a book with each one of them, and what it does is draws all my images together, but also it puts writing in there. But I think for me, it's a good way to draw all the ideas of the exhibition into one little space. And the book itself becomes a space, and it's quite different to the exhibition. So it's not an exhibition catalogue, but it is a kind of a record of the whole process of the making and the images and writing from other people as well,
But also the design of the book. I mean, Francis Van Meel was one of the prominent figures in Fluxus years ago. You don't expect him to be doing this kind of work, and they are really distinctive and special.
It's a real collaboration. They're really good to work with.
Okay. Any questions or comments from anybody on the floor? Would you want to take Margo or Luke or Brian up on anything they've said?
How did you come up with the title?
I needed to find my voice. I know, I went through a few titles, but voices for me kind of said it all. It's given the women a voice, it's given the work a voice in myself.
And the images becoming voices, which is one sense, sight moving over to the ear and becoming acoustic, kind of acoustic images, which is a great Irish proclivity in itself, that the image isn't quite seen as self-contained in Irish visual culture. I mean, elsewhere it is, no problem. But the Irish struggle for visibility is always an issue in Irish, even visual representation. And so it's so telling, literally telling, that it's acoustic, because it's telling stories.
It's a particularly significant thing in Irish culture, that even art education was pretty well set aside during the 1920s and 30s. Okay, it happened at NCAD, national at 3rd level, but the primary level and 2nd level that might lead to that was completely missing. So we have a long way to go. We're still struggling to go for it,
I think the thing of echoes too comes up in the exhibition, that it's the images echo the objects. if you like. They don't just reproduce the objects, they echo the objects. And it's very telling with Markowitz, the paintings of the trees of Lissadell, because then there's an image, an illustration that Markowitz did for the Republican War News, and it's of Republicans taking shelter behind a tree, under cover. They're using the tree as cover against the Free State forces, and that's by Markowitz. And then you have paintings of trees in Lissadell, and there are these echoes. I mean, the images are echoing off each other and echoing off the objects. And that's wonderful in an exhibition, that you feel that the images are talking to themselves and are in dialogue with each other, because in that sense you get the feeling that it is an exhibition. It's not just one picture after another, but it's a kind of like almost like a play in which the images are playing parts and they're speaking different things to each other.
And we have one of the memoirs that we put on, one of the manuscript memoirs that we put on display it's a recent acquisition. It's a diary by one called Maura Redmond, who's actually quite young. She was from Carlisle Street, just off South Circular Road, and she talks. I think she's talking about maybe returning to I think she might have come back in the 30s, but she's just imagining when she imagines the jail later. She talks about these echoes of these songs and these voices of these people from the past, and the songs and the music seems to be again something that kind of brings her back to that moment. And then there's another woman, Hannah Moynihan, and she talks about arriving up here she was from Tralee, and they were brought up, and it was dark by the time they arrived in March. And she talks about hearing the women, they're kind of welcome them by singing Hail Glory St. Patrick. And it took me ages, and sometimes it can be like kind of awful, willfully stupid sometimes. For a few years I said, oh, maybe that was just a popular hymn. I said, it's strange, why were they singing it? And then I looked at the date and it was St. Patrick's Day. So, but
site specific.
Yes. And then it's again an interesting bit of serendipity that I suppose the art piece that we commissioned for the exhibition is that recording by Kaya Kennedy of O'Donnell Abu and Kevin Barry. So this, when they were digging their escape tunnel in August of 23, their system for warning if danger was approaching was somebody would sing or whistle Kevin Barry, and then when the danger passed, O'Donnell Abu would come along, and that's now kind of echoes through the exhibition. And obviously it's specifically relating to that, but also I was kind of thinking of Maura Redmond as well, and her memory of the jail and these echoes of these songs that she had heard as well. So the fact that then kind of independently Margo come up with the title of Voices, again, there's been a lot of serendipity with this exhibition in relation to particularly how the two pieces work out. With one of the Red Cross armbands. So we have a few of them from the forecourts, and we have, sometimes with exhibitions you have to choose one. So which one I choose? I said to my colleague Aoife, who curated the exhibition with me, I said, oh well, I'm just going to check which one Margo uses, and that's the one we'll pick then. Because none of them seemed to be more significant than the other. And then it turned out that Bridie Klein, the woman who had worn that armband, had actually been a prisoner in Kilmainham jail, but we hadn't caught that previously because she came here she gave the false name of Annie Hardwick. So the reason we picked it was because of Margo's work. And then it turned out that was the perfect armband to have picked. So there's been a few of those kind of things.
Her son actually rang me yesterday.
Yeah.
For a couple of days for armband.
Yeah.
Which is really good.
Yeah. Another name that comes up again when I was looking at people who returned here in the list, and this remarkable woman called Eileen McGrain, who later becomes Eileen McCarville, and it was who purchased Going to Wolfe Tone's Grave from Jack Yates. She got Thomas MacDonald's lecturing post in UCD, and she was high octane intelligent. She was the key figure in Collins's intelligence network.
Do you remember the first account of being jailed?
She was an art critic of superlative distinction, and she was also one of the pioneering Joyce scholars. And she managed to get a copy of Ulysses smuggled into Kilmainham when she was here. So if ever you had time on your hands to read Ulysses, be interned in Kilmainham and have nothing else to do, because and so I'm even trying to discover how she got the copy of Ulysses into Kilmainham. I mean, it wasn't like a paperback, it was like a telephone. It was a big hefty tome. And she becomes a remarkable figure then in Irish art history and in Irish, what would be called modernism. She was way ahead of the posse in terms of thinking. And the same with Dorothy Ricardo, the same with so many of these women who were interned. They were just in a different league, really. And the Free State made an awful mistake interning some of these highly articulate and really subversive individuals, because in a way that comes up a lot in the exhibition, the word shame. They're trying to shame the Free State. They're trying to shame them. They're trying to shame them because putting them on the spot. They're trying to put them on the spot.
Do you think that they were in a better position to shame the Free State because they were women?
I do. Yeah, I mean, for the wrong reasons, of course.
Sure.
Chivalry, so on, this kind of stuff. But the manhandling of women, I mean, that really, that caused ructions.
Yeah, the authorities I think they don't know what to do with these women.
Yeah, I mean, that called them out.
Yeah.
And that was a real crisis, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so this clash that this Kilmainham tortures of Dorothy Ricardo recounts, so it happens at the end of April, and nothing like that ever happens again. So there may be low level kind of misuse or mishandling of women afterwards, but nothing on that scale. But I think both sides realise that something like that would be unsustainable to happen again, because women are really badly sort of they're physically removed from the jail.
Some were injured for life.
Yeah.
Friday time was thrown down the stairs.
Yeah. And like McCarthy in her account, it seems clear to me that she's kind of knocked unconscious at one point. But again, I think they are more effective. There was a Morning Ireland actually in this room, they broadcast for a piece to mark the centenary of, I suppose, the final hunger strike of the Civil War, which began at midnight between the 13th and 14th of October. But they were kind of contrasting the effectiveness. Yeah, and it's the effectiveness of the women's hunger strike, relatively speaking, compared to the men. That there's a lot of interest in the women's hunger strikes, and that last hunger strike.
It was more on Sweeney. Yeah. What's the flashpoint?
Yeah. And she brought with her all the, I suppose, the legacy of Terence from Sweeney. Yeah, because the women are in awe of her as well.
Echoes of the suffragettes' hunger strikes
Yeah.
in England.
Well, we had a suffragette in the jail at the time, so when they are going to resist being moved to the NDU in April, one of them mentions that Mary Burke Dowling, who had been a prisoner in Holloway in about 1911, she'd gone over to a suffragette protest, that she'd given them advice based on her training as a suffragette. And we actually have her scrapbook, and it has kind of like a guide to it. I jokingly refer to someone, so you find yourself in prison for being a suffragette, how to behave, but also how to resist arrest. And one of the women refers to this deep-voiced older suffragette, Mary Burke Dowling, who tells them how to resist being removed and how to, I suppose, to grab onto the railings effectively. So there's that really interesting kind of continuity as well, that older tradition.
Because it started with female, with Hannah Sheehy Skeffington and cousins. I mean, the first hunger strike was done by suffragettes, and James Connolly was in prison at the same time, and Frances Sheehy Skeffington for the lockout. And the suffragettes were on hunger strike, and Frances Sheehy Skeffington, Hannah was on hunger. He said, actually, this is something we could take a lead from. So Connolly and Sheehy Skeffington are the first to do it. And then, of course, and then they discovered retrospectively that it was a Celtic form of protest. And Yeats had written a play about it, The King's Threshold, where Shanigan goes on hunger strike against King Gura because out of honour and obligation. So the hunger strike, and when the Republicans found out, oh my God, so they blotted out the female origins of it and replaced it with the Celtic. I mean, the Celtic thing was kind of there, but they didn't know about it first. It was cribbed from the suffragettes. And there's a lovely detail in Dorothy McGarden's typescript, and it's almost Joycean. The title of it is something like Testimony from a Released Prisoner, and she's blotted out the word released. Mm-hmm. She has scratched out the word released, which is so telling, as if there's no release.
Yeah.
I mean, that little detail is so telling in itself, scratched out. I'm not released, even though I'm outside, I'm not released.
I think we probably should wrap up, but I think it's, well, I find it inspiring really that mute images could lead to such rich conversation for the last hour.
It's kind of one of the things in terms of this, I suppose, the silence around their stories for so many years in Kilmainham specifically, even though Nora Connolly O'Brien is on the committee, one of the rules for the restoration of the jail of the organisation in the 60s was that the Civil War wasn't to be discussed, so it wasn't to be discussed socially on the site, so in the canteen or when you were up on the roof, fixing the slates. But also we have the tours from the 70s, and they talk about the tours mentioned in relation to the executions in November 1922, and that's more to, I suppose, to acknowledge the dead, but that's it. But the wider story of the Civil War wasn't told on the tour because, to a certain extent, there isn't an agreed narrative, and the restoration of the jail is in itself, I think, an attempt at a reconciliation project where both sides can be involved. But as a result, the period in which women are most visible in the history of the building then doesn't get talked about. That they do collect material, which I think is important. And I'm not sure if they displayed it or not, but it also meant that back in '96 when the new museum opened, that there was material relating to women. He opened in '66,
yeah.
and in '96 with the new museum, that there is women's material on display in the permanent exhibition, and then Sinead McCool in '97 does Guns and Chiffon. But it's really interesting.
She did the pioneering exhibition.
Yeah, and also because the jail showed it was interested in this material at a very important time in terms of people's lives, then more material starts to come, because people didn't. I think some of these women and their families didn't think that it was of value beyond its preciousness to them. So it's a really interesting ways the complexity of how the story kind of gets forgotten and re-remembered is really interesting. So it's kind of interesting, I think, as well, to see the complexity, because I think sometimes people think someone came along and said, okay, we're deliberately not going to talk about this, we're going to suppress these women, and it's much more subtle than that. The patriarchy is sneaky. But to look at all these kind of different reasons why things don't get talked about, and then why they get their moment.
It's to do with re-remembering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is to say why a show like this particular one, Voices, is so very important. So thank you, Margo.
Thank you. I want to thank Catherine Marshall for all of her support and curation of the show, and you made it happen. And Brian for his incredible support and collaboration. And I think it looks fantastic. All of the museum collection and my look as well, it really works. And thank Luke for his support.